This video is sponsored by War Thunder. In this video I'm going to try and beat Diablo 2 as the mighty Sorceress, but the twist is that I'm not allowed to equip any gear on her. The Sorceress damage scales off the levels of her skills, so I should be able to do decent damage by just leveling up. But on the other hand, with no extra skill points or faster casting speed from gear, there will be a much lower ceiling for my damage. Not to mention a complete lack of defensive stats to protect these fragile wizard bones. Oh. The rules for this challenge are simple. I will try to beat the game on all difficulties from normal to hell, and I will do so without equipping any gear on my Sorceress or carrying any charms in my inventory. I created my character and embarked on this new adventure. Though her spellcasting hands are soft and weak, they could still punch their way through the Bloodmoor just fine. As I hit level 2, it was time to pick my first skill, and I was debating between Charge Bolt and Firebolt. Charge Bolt has more damage potential against both groups and single enemies, but it requires you to stand closer to enemies and the mana cost increases with each level. Firebolt on the other hand can be cast from a long range and has a fixed mana cost regardless of its level, but the damage isn't as impressive. I eventually decided on Charge Bolt to speed up the early game as much as possible. I already had one respec available from Akara if I changed my mind later. I split my early stat points between vitality and energy, since I didn't need any strength or dexterity for gear. I could have gone all in on vitality, but I really wanted a decent mana pool, since I was never going to get more quick slots for my potions without a belt. I cleared out the rest of the Den of Evil with a combination of punches and magic. I put one skill point into Warmth for the mana regeneration and the rest into Charge Bolt for now. Gaining extra levels was the only way for me to become more powerful, so I stopped and farmed Rakanishu a few times to make the upcoming areas a little bit easier. The lightning bolts that he spits out when damaged can be really dangerous to a low level character, and he resisted my lightning damage, but I could still take him down fairly consistently, and all of the excess charge bolts took care of any other enemies around us. The extra levels from Rakanishu helped a lot, and I went through the underground passage, killed the Countess in the Forgotten Tower, and rescued Deckard Cain without facing much of a challenge. I had less than 100 health, which was a bit concerning, but for now I could kill most enemies before they even got a chance to get close to me. Going with Charge Bolt proved to be a wise decision. Before moving on to the cathedral, I collected my free mercenary in town and equipped her with some random armor pieces and a bow with some gems for extra damage. As I said in my gearless paladin video, just because I was stupid enough to face the forces of evil naked doesn't mean that a poor hired mercenary should have to suffer. Well, I can promise that my mercenaries will suffer a lot in this challenge anyway, because the Sorceress does not have a way to boost their defenses or heal them like the paladin does. I still dealt the majority of the damage, but it was nice that she could take care of the 1 or 2 enemies that were left over after a big fight, so I could save some mana. Even without any gear equipped, I zapped my way through Act 1 quickly and made my way through the jail to the catacombs with ease. I could barely take a hit myself, but as long as enemies didn't get close to me, everything was fine, and for now Charge Bolt was really good at keeping enemies from getting close to me. Later in the catacombs I encountered my first lightning immune enemy. Luckily my mercenary was able to take care of this one for me, after I revived her that is. And it would not be something I would really have to think about for a while, as it's very uncommon to find immune monsters in normal. At level 14 with a level 12 Charge Bolt, I entered the catacombs level 4 to fight Andariel. Clearing the area of minions was no problem, but against Andariel herself a combination of overconfidence and greed caused me to stay a bit too close for too long, and I had my first death. This is why I don't do these challenges in hardcore mode, by the way. As punishment, or maybe a reminder to play more carefully, I had to walk back to Andariel all the way from the inner cloister waypoint, because I forgot to activate the one in Catacombs level 2. The second attempt against Andariel was a success though. In fact, my mercenary took her down while I was fiddling around with my inventory. Before going down into the sewers of Act 2 to grab the free skill point from Radamant, I hired a new mercenary. I chose the Prayer Aura, hoping that I wouldn't have to chug as many health potions. I gave him the armor and the helm that my rogue was wearing, and a rare spear that Andariel dropped. Radamant was easily taken care of, and for now my Charge Bolt was absolutely decimating any and all obstacles in my way. The indoor maps of Act 2 like the sewers and the tombs were great for this Sorceress, or I guess I mean underground. Well, my point is that the layout of these maps with narrow corridors and square rooms were great because enemies could only approach me from one direction, meaning they had to walk through a sea of lightning damage. I collected the Horadric Cube and used one of my favorite underappreciated cube recipes to create some savage polearms. I had only found 2 diamonds, but I got a polearm that my mercenary would be able to use in just a few levels and one to upgrade to later. I collected the Staff of Kings from the Maggot Lair, and on my way to the next quest piece, I hit level 18. This unlocked the teleport skill, which was going to be an important tool for this Sorceress later. For the time being it was quite expensive relative to my small mana pool, but I could make good use of it for getting me or my mercenary out of danger, and it's quite nice to be able to teleport through walls to avoid backtracking. But my favorite use of the skill is to teleport past things that I don't want to deal with, like Fangskin protecting the Claw Viper amulet for example. Well, this time I did deal with him, but from the advantageous position on the top of the stairs to the altar, which enemies can't climb for some reason. The terrain of the Arcane Sanctuary really messed up the enemy AI trying to reach me, while letting my charge bolt pass through freely, so I took some time to clear out most of the enemies here for experience. I'm not above using every cheesy tactic I can for this challenge, because I'm going to need it. After almost losing a wizarding duel with the summoner, but eventually coming out victorious, it wasn't long before I reached Talresha's tomb and Duriel. I tried going in straight away, thinking I could maybe have enough time to spam Duriel down with charge bolt before my mercenary died. But nope, he lasted like 2 hits and I barely had any time to cast a spell at all, so I TP'd out to prepare a bit. I bought 10 thawing potions, which in addition to removing the cold effect gives you 50% additional cold resist for a short duration. That seemed to be enough, but I messed up the second attempt by fumbling with my inventory so I couldn't heal my mercenary in time. 3rd time's the charm, and on the next attempt I took Duriel down. After finishing Act 2, I took a break in my recording session, during which my recording software updated automatically, and I managed to play through almost all of the jungle of Act 3 before noticing that my recording looked like this. I never update any of my software in the middle of making a video for this exact reason, but I was not given a choice to snooze on this update, so thanks a lot, Auto Updater. Luckily it wasn't too long before I noticed, and nothing really interesting happened during this time anyway. I was just collecting some quest items. I was a bit worried before going into Act 3, because all the new range attackers and fast moving enemies. I was standing completely still while spamming charge bolt, making me an easy target, but I could take quite a few hits without dying or even having my spells interrupted, so for now, as long as I had potions, I could continue mowing through the game. I did run into some scary situations, but since my spells weren't interrupted, teleport could get me out of most tricky situations. Now to be fair, teleport was also what put me in those situations to begin with most of the time, but I just couldn't stop teleporting. I collected the 3rd and final of Kalim's organs, with footage this time, and headed straight to Travancore. My mercenary had fallen behind me on levels quite a bit, and it wasn't until just before facing the High Council that he hit level 19, so he could finally equip the polearm I queued for him in Act 2. To be honest, I was a bit let down by the damage increase, but I guess that the rare he was using did have a lot of elemental damage on it, an upgrade nonetheless. My mercenary tried taking them on all at once, and I failed to save him because I was once again fumbling with my potions in my inventory. I noticed that a lot of bad things were happening while I had my inventory open. Without the belt I had to restock potions from my inventory very often, and this caused me to be distracted and lose sight of what was happening in fights. It wasn't the biggest issue, but I was not expecting that inventory management was going to be one of the obstacles I would have to overcome in this challenge. I resurrected my mercenary and we finished up the rest of the council, as you can see in this cinematic shot of the fight, and headed down into the Durance of Hate. And despite some slight hiccups with his guards, I soon faced off against Mephisto. The fight started off well and I managed to static him down quite a bit very quickly. Then he one-shot my mercenary out of nowhere. I didn't get what happened in the moment, but now when making the video I can see that it was his charge bolt attack, giving me a bit of my own medicine, eh? Fair play, Mephisto, fair play. After a trip to town, he decided to use his weaker attacks for the rest of the fight, and I was soon able to sap him down. Then I was on to Act 4 and I was expecting things to get a lot harder soon. The first 2 areas had enemies that were easy to deal with. Well, for me anyway, not so much for my mercenary. It's been a long time since I had to deal with souls in the Plains of Despair on a challenge run, which I of course was thankful for. Static field may is all trivial, but the difficulty started to ramp up in the City of the Damned with several powerful range attackers. I had been able to get my health full a bit over 200, but with 0 resistances I could not take many hits at all. I took a detour to collect an Orc Rune from the Hellforge, and soon I entered the Chaos Sanctuary. I was relying heavily on my mercenary to keep enemies busy while I spammed charge bolt, but it was getting harder and harder to keep him alive. Teleport saved him from bad situations several times, and even when he did die, he wasn't too expensive to revive yet, so we made steady progress. With the power of a maxed level 1 skill and using my mercenary as an expendable resource, I cleared out all 3 seals to summon Diablo. I started out the fight aggressively, going in for static field spam right away. I was ready to switch to teleport and get out as soon as I started taking damage, but once Diablo used his lightning attack, I didn't even have a chance to react fast enough. And this happened again and again and again. Now I don't like wearing bosses down by doing death runs at them over and over, especially not in a challenge like this, but I did not really see any other options for this character right now. I couldn't increase my defenses in any way, and it would take so much to get my mercenary to be able to survive, so I settled for a Pyrrhic victory. I could have made this fight better by using a respec, but I wasn't sure what skills I wanted to go with yet, so I told myself that I would be better prepared for the next Diablo fight and moved on to Act 5. Now let me tell you about this video sponsor War Thunder, which you can now play for free on PC and consoles. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Choose between over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships from 10 different nations, including both historical icons and modern day war machines. The vehicles in this game are not just boxes with a health bar. They have detailed individual components like the engine, weapon systems and crew, so it really matters where you land your shots and what kind of ammunition you use. One of my favorite features is the Damage X review. When either you or your enemy is destroyed, the game shows you exactly where the vehicle was hit, what components were damaged, and how the vehicle was destroyed. The detailed vehicle damage system, together with realistic graphics and authentic sound effects, brings you onto the battlefield in intense PvP combat with the most powerful war machines of our time. And with over 70 million players from around the world and a lot of content to discover, War Thunder is the perfect game for fans of military history. Play War Thunder for free now on PC, PlayStation or Xbox, and make sure to use the link in the video description or the pinned comment for a massive bonus pack for new or returning players who haven't played the game in 6 months. The bonus includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium account. The bonus is available on all platforms but only for a limited time, so don't miss out. Now back to the video. I love starting Act 5 in normal when I'm playing a character with any sort of area damage. The battlefields outside of town have high monster density, the enemies are easier than in the Chaos Sanctuary and they give good experience. Since I was in the homeland of the barbarians, I decided to swap my mercenary to a barbarian one. Welcome to the team, Ulf, or Uffe as his friends call him. I breezed through the outdoor battlefield areas without much trouble. I even started playing rather aggressively again, but in the frozen river my recklessness nearly killed me, so I had to slow down a bit and proceed more carefully. I rescued Anya for that sweet 10 extra resistances across the board. 10 resist doesn't sound like much, but it was a lot better than what I had before. But whether it was a meaningful power boost or just a vanity upgrade remained to be seen. There is no difference in getting one shot for 1000 damage or getting one shot for 900 damage after all. Progress was steady and not too slow to be honest, and Charged Bolt was still dealing decent damage, but it had become very mana hungry and I had to drink at least a couple of mana potions per fight. I wasn't planning on using Charged Bolt forever, but I was still not sure what kind of build I wanted to go with, so I decided to try and finish the rest of normal with my current one. In the Ancient's way, enemies really started to become a lot more dangerous, killing my mercenary several times while I was looking for the exit. The Ancient themselves were not that hard though, mainly thanks to the power of Static Field having no cap on how low it can get enemies in normal, and I defeated all of them on the first try. The difficulty of the Worldstone Keep depends so much on what kind of enemy spawn there, and this time I got lucky, with none of the levels having any really difficult enemies. On my way down to Bale, I found Saigon's boots. Too bad my mercenary didn't have a gear slot for his feet. Glitching into physical objects doesn't count as wearing gear, right? The throne had Death Lords, which can be a real pain, but luckily they only spawned in small groups and there were no elites as far as I could tell. The waves in the throne room were not trivial, but nothing special either in terms of challenge. None of them were too difficult to defeat, but the last 3 waves could destroy my mercenary really quickly, and I absolutely needed someone to tank for me with my current build, so I had to take them on a few at a time far away from the throne. Once the final wave was defeated, Bale failed to hold the line for the Primevals. Again thanks to Static Field being so strong in normal, and with just one enemy to worry about, it was much easier for me to sneak in real close for Static Field to hit compared to the fights in the throne room. After just under a minute after the fight started, I defeated Bale and with that the normal difficulty of Diablo 2 without wearing any gear, but there was no doubt that the real challenges were still ahead of me. I'm going to try something a little bit different for this video. I'm going to skip ahead through all of Nightmare. I personally feel like it can get a bit repetitive to cover the entire game 3 times in one video, and I honestly don't find Nightmare to be that interesting compared to Normal and Hell. And with no gear there was not much happening with my character either. Please let me know what you thought of this. Do you agree with me or do you feel like something was missing from the video without Nightmare? I appreciate your feedback. However, a few things happened in Nightmare that I still want to talk about. From basically the very start of the difficulty, I could not keep my mercenary alive at all, so I ended up swapping him out for an Act 1 rogue instead. This meant that I lost my tank that was supposed to keep enemies in place for me, but a dead tank is no better than no tank. I farmed the Nightmare Countess until I could make her an insight bow, and from that point on she acted as a walking meditation aura, though the added crowd control from her freezing arrow was not insignificant either. I also respec to a Blizzard Sorceress, which allowed me to move around more freely while still dealing damage. And even without gear, once I got a few points into Blizzard and Cold Mastery, I started to melt most enemies like they were nothing. By going with a single element again, I was still going to have to find a solution to immune monsters, but I snoozed on that problem for now and decided to let future me handle it. I also got a couple of lucky rune finds with an rune from the Hellforge and a Mal rune from a random chest. Finding decent runes in Nightmare outside of the Hellforge always catches me off guard. Now I couldn't benefit from these drops myself, but perhaps I could suit up a decent mercenary later. I ended up finishing Nightmare as a pure Blizzard Sorceress on level 49. That was quite a low level, but I never felt like I needed to stop and grind for levels at any point. Blizzard together with Cold Mastery was just so strong. Eager to get going and without further preparations, I entered Hell difficulty with no gear, but honestly with a little bit of overconfidence after breezing through Nightmare. This wouldn't last long though. Most enemies in the start of Act 1 are slow and easy to deal with, meaning easy pickings for Blizzard. Most enemies are immune to at least one element though, meaning a single element build was not ideal. I hadn't really made a plan how to tackle Hell, but I didn't feel like I needed to change my build right away, so I began Act 1 without changing anything. My Mercenary's Insight was made in a longbow, so her physical damage wasn't very impressive, and since I was dealing only cold damage, I swapped out the cold rogue for a fire one, and that was at least enough to slowly clear the cold immune enemies in the Den of Evil. I could technically skip all cold immune enemies, but I really wanted a free skill point from the first quest. This was a real grind though, with how little damage my mercenary did, and how little help I could offer her, but with the range advantage it was just a matter of time and patience. Corpse Fire spawned lightning enchanted though, which was quite dangerous, so I had to dance around the cave with teleport to dodge him while my mercenary tickled him with arrows to slowly wear him down. Not too bad in the grand scheme of things, and in the end I could do it rather safely, but this was the longest Den of Evil quest I've had in a long time, creeping up to close to 30 minutes. At this point I really felt like respecing to have two different elements, but at level 49 I didn't really have enough skill points to support two different skills anyway, so I carried on with Blizzard for the time being until I got a few more levels and figured out what skills I wanted to use. It wasn't that I was against teleporting past cold immune enemies, but between my slow cast speed, my small mana pool and the defensive powers of a barrel, teleporting ahead into unknown territory wasn't a great strategy either. I still did it, but I tried to do so sparingly. Skipping a lot of enemies would also mean that I didn't get much experience, which was at odds with my desire to get more levels for more skill points for a potential dual elemental build. So before going much further, I stopped and farmed the mausoleum for a while. It was quite safe and easy to do, because the monsters that spawn here are slow moving and there are no natural cold immune enemies in this area. I cleared out the entire mausoleum a few times, putting me at level 60, which still wasn't that high of a level to start Hell, but it was another 10 skill points which made a big difference. I looked at my skill trees for a while, but for whatever reason I still couldn't decide on what to do skill build wise, so I moved on as a cold sorceress for the time being with a decent bit of extra power from the additional levels. I couldn't do much against immune monsters, but against everything else Blizzard almost made me forget that I was playing a challenge for a while, making short work of even elite enemies. I reached the bottom of the catacombs and prepared to take on Andariel. I wanted to try a tactic that I read in a comment over a year ago on one of my first videos. I wasn't able to find the comment again, but I'll show you the trick. I cleared out the room before Andariel's chambers, and then I didn't open the final door, but instead teleported over and tried to lure her towards me. Teleporting deep into enemy territory was sketchy to say the least, but I managed to get her almost all the way to the door. Once back on the safe side, I started casting Blizzard, targeting the ground as close to the door as possible. For whatever reason, doors only block the main part of attacks, but any splash damage or area damage like Fireball or in this case Blizzard goes past the door to the other side. I could quickly tell that it was working because the zombies and fallen died on the other side. After a couple of minutes I got struck by overconfidence from having a powerful Blizzard spell again, and I got impatient. Shouldn't she be dead already? Maybe I wasn't hitting her, so I teleported over to check, which nearly killed me. She was definitely taking damage though, so I spent the rest of the battle in the safety of the other side of a wooden door. Soon enough she was defeated and I could move on to Act 2. This was of course quite a cheesy tactic, but it's a good strategy to have for the times when you're a bit weak at this point. I probably could still have defeated her by running around in circles while casting Blizzard in her path, but at least I probably saved myself a fair bit of gold on potions and potential deaths. Though even with that my gold supply was quickly being drained. I started Act 1 with over 400,000 gold, but now I was down to less than 100,000. The biggest cost by far was reviving my mercenary, but buying potions in bulk wasn't cheap either. And I ran dry sooner than anticipated. I took down Radaman to get the free skill point from the Book of Skill, but my mercenary died several times while doing so when I returned to town I didn't have enough gold to revive her. This was a terrible situation because I had so much of the game left. The meditation aura she provided via her bow was great, but also having just a bit of the enemy's attention drawn away from me gave me a lot more room to cast my spells and avoid damage. I needed to farm some more gold, so I went back to the mausoleum in Act 1 for a while, and I made sure to pick up more of the loot I found this time to sell. I did a pretty poor job of doing that while I was here the last time farming for levels, and now I had to suffer the consequences of my own laziness. The gold was stacking up quite quickly, but after passing 800,000 I started to get a bit bored, and I figured I was ready to move on. Once I was back in the desert, I decided to progress more slowly to keep the gold spent on unnecessary deaths and mercenary revives to a minimum. Or actually, let's say more carefully, because the pace wasn't slow at all. The maggot lair was safe and easy thanks to Glacial Spike freezing the closest enemy to completely block the path, while Blizzard rained down destruction on everyone else. How Blizzard works inside of a narrow underground tunnel, I do not know, but work it does. The Claw Viper Temple on the other hand, well, take a look. I did not have a strategy for this whatsoever, so I resorted to holding down the teleport button and praying that I wouldn't land in the middle of a pack of elite Claw Vipers, and it actually worked out on the first try. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of luck. The Arcane Sanctuary was no problem, and I soon found myself in Telrasha's tomb. I was a bit worried about the tomb since there's a lot of cold immune enemies and the map can be really huge in hell difficulty. But I got very lucky and found the entrance to Duriel right away, and on top of that, no cold immune enemies spawned in the area around the entrance. I mean, just look at this map. This might be the shortest path in Telrasha's tomb I have ever seen in hell difficulty. I drew a sigh of relief, but then quickly readied myself for the next challenge as I entered Duriel's pit. Well, it turned out that Duriel was no match for the combo of Blizzard and Teleport. I was actually a bit surprised how easy it was, and despite having to teleport a couple of times between every cast of Blizzard, it didn't even take that long to defeat him. And even when fumbling around in my inventory to restock potions in my belt, he wasn't able to take down my mercenary even once. Once defeated, Duriel dropped a unique blade, which is the Spectral Shard. The mana, bonus to all resistances and the massive amount of FCR would have been great, but all I could do was look at it and dream of what could have been. Something that has always amused me is Lysander's dialogue after you finish the last quest in Act 2.
I'm sorry things didn't turn out as you had hoped.
Saying I'm sorry things didn't turn out as you had hoped just sounds so funny to me considering we're trying to hunt down evil demons to save the world. But thanks for considering me less annoying than average, I guess. Act 3 started out the same as before. I skipped cold immune enemies completely, but every other enemy just melted to Blizzard. I would run into some problems I couldn't skip past eventually, but for the time being I was able to power through the first part of Act 3 and gather all 3 organs. Then it was time for what is in my opinion the first of the final big hurdles in these challenge playthroughs, the High Council of Travancore. Step 1 was to try and secure the area around the temple. The area can spawn with a bunch of nasty cold immune enemies, and while I did get a few champion hierophants and a few vampires, it wasn't too many of them, so I decided to give it a try. One of the elite council members also always spawns cold immune, and he immediately chased me all the way back to the waypoint. The fight didn't start off great, and I considered if I had to respec to a dual elemental build now so I could defeat them. But I was actually not sure which of the council members it is that drops the flame, and the rest of them were stacked up so nicely inside of the temple, so I decided to try and take them down to see if I could pass the quest without having to defeat the cold immune one. By standing outside of the temple and casting Blizzard in through their windows, I was able to take down the rest of the council really safely. This was actually a much easier fight than I thought it would be, and one of them did drop the flail, so I was able to keep progressing as a pure Blizzard sorceress for now. The Durance of Hate had dolls, maulers and cold immune vampires, so I stuck to one of the walls and teleported through the entire dungeon as fast as possible. Once I reached Mephisto, I let my mercenary die and then lured Mephisto back to the moat where I could safely cheese him from a distance. A classic sorcerer strategy as old as time. There was a rogue council member who interfered and almost ruined my whole plan, but I froze him with Glacial Spike while Blizzard wore him down, and eventually I was free to concentrate on Mephisto again, who couldn't do anything but stand there and wait for his inevitable demise. In Act 4 the difficulty made a noticeable jump. It felt like enemies were able to tank my damage better, but the biggest difference was the damage they dealt to me and my mercenary. So far I had been able to take a few hits from most enemies, allowing me some wiggle room when moving around the battlefield. But now any enemy who got close enough to me to get off an attack was a potential lethal threat. I played the beginning of the act slowly and carefully, trying to avoid teleporting ahead blindly, and defeated most of the enemies that stood in my way. I unfortunately got burning souls in the Plains of Despair, and this was pretty rough. I was able to take a few of them down from the safety of the entrance, but once I started moving out into the open, I quickly got sniped. My slow movement and cast speed was not a favorable matchup against their fast lightning attacks. After dying a few times trying to fight them, I decided to try and teleport past the area instead, and I first tried following the edge of the map north. Okay, that was a no-go. How about the south? I wasn't really sure what to do here. If I couldn't fight them or teleport past them, what was I supposed to do? It felt like I was really close to being able to teleport past them though. It was just that trying to navigate the edge of the map at the same time put me in weird situations where I got stuck on things or didn't move far enough with each teleport. So in a desperate attempt I decided to just pick a direction and hold down teleport without paying any attention to the map. And it worked. I zoomed right on through to the City of the Damned. It wasn't an elegant solution, but it was a solution. And a solution that's just a solution is solution enough for me. Skipping the Plains of Despair unfortunately meant that I gave up on the 2 free skill points from the Isuel quest, but there wasn't much I could do about it now. If I really needed extra skill points later, I could perhaps reset the map and hope to get one without souls. For now though, I headed for the River of Flame as fast as possible. After dancing with the Fasto over this bridge for a few minutes, the Hellforge gave me another rune. So far in Act 4 I hadn't encountered many cold immune enemies at all, just a few elites, so while it was dangerous with my terrible defensive stats, at least I could defeat all enemies that I faced. That was until I reached the Chaos Sanctuary. The Oblivion Knights that spawn here are all immune to cold damage, and thanks to their annoying curses and their high damage output, they were not really enemies I could afford to ignore. My mercenary wasn't looking to be a reliable solution either, as he was barely able to defeat a single isolated knight while I fed her several potions. These were just regular enemies too, and I would have to defeat at least one elite Oblivion Knight, as Lord Disease is one of the seal bosses that you have to defeat in order to face Diablo. My options were either to respec to a dual elemental build or significantly upgrade my mercenary, or perhaps a mix of both. I had been neglecting my mercenary's gear for a long time and basically treated her as a walking meditation aura and a distraction, so she was due for some upgrades. Maybe an Act 2 Desert mercenary would have been stronger at this point, but the rogue had suffered through hell with me this far, so she deserved to stick around until the end. I had found some decent runes, but no great mercenary items, or even good bases for rune words to be honest. A better base bow to make a stronger insight would have been great, but no luck with that so far. I went to farm in the Stony Tomb for a while looking for a new bow, but since I would basically need to find an exceptional or elite bow with exactly 4 sockets or some really good damage stats, the odds weren't looking great. After about an hour I gave up on farming without finding a new bow or any other upgrades for her, though it did at least get me a few levels. I had a breastplate with 3 sockets in my stash, and I used one of my runes to make gearless. The crushing blow and the open wounds effect are reduced when using a range attack, but they still work, and the extra resistances were nice. The cold damage also looked really good, but that would obviously not help me deal with cold immune enemies. The duress armor alone did not feel like it was enough of an upgrade for my mercenary to take care of all the cold immune enemies herself, so I decided to also use a respec and go for a dual elemental build. The question was only what build to go for. There are certainly some good dual elemental builds, but I thought long and hard about it before deciding. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I did not only consider what skills deal good damage with relatively few skill points, but also which skills were safest to use in this particular challenge. What I really mean is that I wanted skills that I could cast from a safe distance, out of harm's way. I spent 10 minutes looking at the skill tree, and after all that I ended up deciding on Frozen Orb and Meteor, perhaps the most cookie-cutter dual elemental build in the game's history. I really wanted to go with Blizzard and Hydra, but I was afraid that my skill points would be spread too thin, and that I would have trouble spamming Hydras fast enough to keep their DPS up while running away from danger. Maybe Blizzard and Meteor could have been an option, and I really prefer Blizzard to Frozen Orb personally, but again I fear that damage would be too low with limited skill points, and Frozen Orb is really strong even without synergies. Before moving on, I also made my mercenary a new headpiece by buying a socketed helm and putting some runes in it. I really wanted to increase her fire resist, but to my surprise I didn't have a single rel rune in my stash, so I left the last socket empty for now because I figured I would find one eventually. But the problem with this plan is it also hinges on me remembering that a socket is empty. With Frozen Orb as my new main damage dealer, I was still dealing pretty good damage, but right away I could notice that it put me closer to danger compared to Blizzard. The orb deals more damage if you can target it, so it moves on top of the enemy before it explodes, which really limited my range. I started progressing through the Chaos Sanctuary with my new build, and while basically all fights were dangerous, I was able to handle all enemies on the way to the center. Once I got a bit more used to the playstyle of Frozen Orb, it was actually kind of easy. I was honestly a bit surprised how well things were going. And thanks to Meteor, even those pesky Oblivion Knights didn't stand a chance. Vizier of Chaos was the easiest seal boss, as he always is. Lord Disease dealt a lot of damage, but since it was relatively easy to take down every other enemy close to him, I had a lot of room to move around and could dodge most of his attacks. And a dozen of burning rocks from the sky later, he was defeated. The Infector of Souls chased me all the way to the other side of the arena, but his group likes to run back and forth a lot, giving me a lot of opportunities for free damage on them, so it didn't take too long to wear them down. The Infector of Souls dropped a unique serpent skin armor, the skin of the Viper Magi. What a drop to get in this particular challenge. I wasn't able to resist the temptation, but luckily my Sorceress was so weak, with a mere 10 points in strength, that she couldn't even carry a piece of leather. The Chaos Sanctuary went better than expected, and it didn't take too long to defeat all of the Seal Guardians. Now I was up against Diablo, and his fire attacks were difficult to dodge and really dangerous. It is rarely the case that his AoE Fire Nova is the biggest threat, but this time it made me flee the fight several times to be able to safely heal up out of danger. Trying to avoid his spells, keep my mercenary alive, making sure Frozen Orb hit, and fiddling around with my inventory to refill potions all at the same time was a bit messy, but Frozen Orb did great damage to Diablo as well, so it was only a few minutes of chaotic teleporting and Frozen Orb spam before he shattered into ice cubes.
I need mana.
There's not much to say about the beginning of Act 5. Ranged enemies were a bit scary on the busy battlefield because I couldn't see all of their projectiles in time, but as much as I have been joking about how weak this Sorceress was, she did have almost 800 health thanks to having dumped over 300 points into vitality, so it would take more than a couple of javelins to the face to stop her. I followed the edges of the battlefield maps to avoid being surrounded, killing most of the monsters that stood in my way, but I also didn't mind teleporting past enemies that I couldn't or didn't want to deal with. I did die a few times while rushing through the early parts, but most of the time it was because I got impatient and did something stupid, like teleporting ahead into a big group of monsters. It turned out that 5 javelins to the face was more than I could handle. Once I reached the ice caves, things got a bit trickier. A lot of enemies here were cold immune, but honestly the damage from Meteor was quite good. It was just a bit hard to hit enemies that were moving around. The clear speed was still much better than the vendor-only melee barbarian from my last video though, so I wasn't complaining. My graphics card got a bit of a workout too, which was good because I think it's getting a bit lazy from only playing Diablo 2. I found a rare spider bow with a lot of enhanced damage, which more than doubled my mercenary's damage output. I didn't really need her to deal much damage since I now had Meteor for cold immunes, so I valued the meditation aura way higher, but I put it in my cube to carry with me just in case I would run into a both fire and cold immune enemy that I needed to defeat later. I made it to the Ancients and for once I remembered to stock the ground with extra potions for the fight. I used every bit of gold I had for potions, so I was really hoping to make it on the first attempt, or I would have to go and farm more gold before another attempt. I began by trying to separate the Ancients so I wouldn't have to fight them all at once, and with teleport it was easier than with most characters. I should have looked closer at all 3 of them to see what stats they spawn with before committing to the fight, a little foreshadowing of things to come. But I managed to get Talik isolated first and began sharding him down with my orb. His whirlwind could deal some crazy damage if I wasn't careful, and he was really close to taking both me and my mercenary down early in the fight. But eventually I found a rhythm where I could have used teleport to avoid his attacks while he still ran into my spells over and over, and once I did, the fight was over quickly. Then I went to separate the other 2, and that's when I noticed that Korlik had spawned immune to both fire and cold. In hindsight I should probably have reset the fight here because I hadn't used any of the potions on the ground yet, but in the heat of battle I was completely locked onto the enemies in front of me, so I got Madok alone in the corner and started taking him down while my rogue tanked his attacks. His amplified damage curse did raise the tension of the fight quite a bit, but by continuously feeding her potions he was able to sustain his axes. And soon 2 barbarians were down, with only 1 left to go. But first I had to wait for the curse to run out. I swapped out my mercenary's bow for the spider bow in my cube and approached Korlik. And luckily for me, he hadn't gotten any really dangerous stats, so I was able to out-heal his damage with my potions. He wasn't taking damage very quickly at all, but he was definitely taking enough damage for him to lose health faster than I was consuming potions. A bit into the fight I wanted to be a bit silly for the video and started blasting him with telekinesis for 1 to 2 lightning damage. And that almost made me lose my mercenary because I didn't see how low she got. That would have been a really embarrassing way for this fight to end. But it didn't end that way and we continued to dance around the area at Summit. And I even stepped in to tank a few hits from him occasionally to allow my mercenary to deal damage to him faster. And after a while, we defeated Korlik and with that, the Ancients. Thanks Blaze, I couldn't have done it without you. I ended up using most of the potions I brought to the fight and only had a few left in my inventory afterwards, so I would have to go and farm some more gold before I tackled the final challenge of the game. But first I tried going into the Worldstone Keep to grab the final waypoint. Well, I ended up being absolutely smoked by some souls before I found the waypoint, and with no gold, no mercenary and no potions, I had to give up on the waypoint and go and farm more gold right away. I went to Lower Kurast and opened some chests for loot to sell until I could afford to resurrect my mercenary. Then we went to Act 4 and the Plains of Despair. That was by no means the easiest area I could choose, but I figured I might as well try and finally take down Israel for the 2 extra skill points while I was backtracking anyway. No souls spawned in the Plains of Despair this time, so I managed to take down Israel with ease. I had not collected very much gold though, so once again I went back to the Stony Tombs in Act 2 and did a few rounds. It was just such a safe and easy place to farm. After just a couple of full clears and selling most of the loot, I had collected over 350,000 gold and I decided to tackle the Worldstone Keep once again. And I had picked up every rejuvenation potion I had found since starting Hell and saved them in my stash. I suffered from a severe case of too good to use syndrome, thinking I might need them for later, but now there wasn't that much of the game left, so I reluctantly took a handful with me. They might come in very handy if I needed to do some dangerous teleporting. Though on this attempt I got much easier enemy spawning in the Worldstone Keep. On level 2 where I died to souls on the first attempt, I now got mostly mummies and skeletons. They were still quite annoying to deal with, especially with their strong poison attacks, but they didn't instantly destroy me like the souls did, so I could at least grind through the area slowly with caution and patience. The third level also spawned with manageable but annoying enemies, but this time I found the stairs almost right away, so I didn't have to deal with too many of them. The Throne of Destruction had souls though, so I had to advance extremely slowly, using Meteor for maximum range to take them out a few at a time. I died several times here because every small mistake was punished by a couple of soul lightning beams to the face, and that was more than I could handle. I spent the majority of my saved up gold on resurrecting my mercenary, which wasn't a great situation considering I hadn't even reached the throne room yet. The actual throne room luckily had very few enemies in it though, so once I reached it, it was no problem clearing it out. The first wave was no match for Frozen Orb and the fight was quickly over. The second wave was really tricky because the skeletons are immune to cold damage, and even if I took them down, I never shattered them since I did it with Meteor, so they kept being resurrected. The mummies eventually spread out though, and by slowly chewing through the enemies I was able to take down the mummies one by one, and eventually all of them. The third wave was dealing a lot of damage, but was not too difficult to defeat by pulling them far back from the throne and spamming Frozen Orb, while moving out of the range of their hydras as they summoned them. Wave number 4 chased me all the way back to the entrance since they are so fast, but teleport was even faster so I could get a shot or two off every time I teleported, and after dancing around the entrance for a while, I cleaned up the last of them. I was really worried about the final wave since it was a huge problem in my last video, but I had forgotten how slow they are. I still lured them out a few at a time just to be safe, but they honestly didn't stand much of a chance against Frozen Orb and they barely put me in any danger. Clearing all 5 waves took just over 20 minutes. That sounds like a lot, but all in all it wasn't that bad at all. Much easier than I had anticipated. All of the random souls in the throne that I had to defeat before starting the waves were much more of a problem. And then it was just Bailiff. His spells dealt a lot of damage to me thanks to my terrible resistances, but I had just about enough life so that none of his spells one-shot me. My stash of full rejuvenation potions came in very clutch for this fight, as I could stand and tank his spells for a bit and spam Frozen Orb on him, and then teleport away to safety when I needed to put more potions in my belt. Compared to when I did this challenge with the Paladin, I played through the game quicker and killed enemies faster, but I also died a lot more since the Paladin was much safer. Overall I would rate them about the same on how difficult the rounds were. And after a few minutes and a lot of purple potions, I defeated the final difficulty of Diablo 2 without wearing a single piece of equipment. It turns out that spells are good, and Cold Master in particular is great. Shout out to War Thunder for sponsoring. Check out War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation or Xbox, and make sure to use my link in the video description or the pinned comment. New and returning players who haven't played the game in 6 months who use the link will also get a massive bonus pack including multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency and more. The bonus is available on all platforms but only for a limited time, so don't miss out. And also a huge thanks to Peter B, who has kindly decided to become a member of the Goblin Gang. The Loot Lords, Diablo Dudes, the Beautiful Barbarians. Name pending, but a big thanks for supporting the channel. If you'd also like to support the channel, click the join button or the link in the description of the video for more information. And here's the video of when I did this challenge with the Paladin, which was a very different experience from this one.